and we wish to pay our respects by acknowledging their ancestors and affirming their sovereign rights as First People. And for those of you who are new to Shape Up, welcome. And Danielle, if I could have the next slide when you get a chance. Our mission at Shape Up is to advance health equity in San Francisco by collaborating with community partners on systems changes that increase nutrition security and active living. And we do this through convening mission-aligned partners for collective impact and networking, addressing health equity and upstream risk factors for chronic disease prevention through stakeholder capacity building, including sessions like this, and working to advance policy systems and environmental change strategies. And here is a little bit about our coalition structure. So our coalition is our sort of biggest and broadest group of folks. There are currently about 50 community partners in that coalition, as well as a number of folks who participate as individuals. And the focus of that group is really collaboration, a learning community, and serving as a convener to bring folks together. Through our action teams, we move forward strategic priorities of the coalition. Right now we have two. One is focused on capacity building and the other on those policy systems and environmental changes. Our terrific steering committee is a cross-sector of stakeholder partners that provide strategic direction to the coalition. So Sarah and I serve on the steering committee. And then we are extraordinarily lucky, for those of you who work in the coalitions or in collaboratives, we are extraordinarily lucky to have backbone staff. So we have support from the San Francisco Department of Public Health for this coalition, including the terrific Danielle, who has done all of the logistics for today's Lunch and Learn. So thank you very much, Danielle. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Nelson, who is will be our facilitator and moderator for today, and she will introduce our two speakers.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for being here, folks. And if you are watching this as a recording, feel free to reach out to us. Very excited to have a couple of folks with us to speak to the merger process. So Robin is a founder of KidSafe SF, a San Francisco-based organization advocating for safe streets for kids to walk and bike to school. And they went through a merger with Streets for All to become Streets for All SF, which is a chapter of the statewide organization. So it's an interesting merger process of merging into a larger umbrella org. Robin also led the campaign to make JFK Promenade in Golden Gate Park car-free, which, thank you, Robin. I love walking and biking and running and roller skating out there, as the campaign manager for Prop J, which passed with 63% of the vote. So people love walking and biking in Golden Gate Park. Before getting into walking and biking in safe streets, Robin worked in national politics, led marketing teams in technology companies, and is a San Francisco resident where she lives with her 3 kids, and you can see her on the bus, on board, on her cargo e-bike. Wave to me if you see me, Robin. Same here. We are also very excited to have Laura deTar, the Executive Director of Fresh Approach. She's been there since 2013, starting as the Nutrition Education Manager, as a very small org with 1 part-time and 3 full-time employees. Became the Program Director in 2017 and Executive Director of 2020, a great time to become an Executive Director. Laura's grown the organization to now serve 5 counties and have 20 full-time staff members, establishing strong partnerships with local government, other community-based organizations that improve community food access, nutrition, and food sovereignty, connecting other orgs to local farmers and food systems in their programming. Laura is very passionate about equitable communities as well as food systems. All right, I am now going to talk a little bit about my own story, who I am, and the merger process that I went through. Coincidentally, I was the founding executive director of Fresh Approach back in 2008. No! And left to found a nonprofit called 3 Squares in 2011 that I really wanted to take food education to communities through hands-on cooking. I saw a lot of nutrition ed being done in a different way through more talking and recipes and samples, and I wanted to put knives in people's hands, which is not easy to do, but started a nonprofit in 2011 to do that. I then met the owner of Buy Right Market, Sam McGannum, who had just written a cookbook called Eat Good Food, which is a great book, and invited him to speak at one of my fundraising events. And, back in the day, this was like a $10 breakfast that we staff cooked ourselves. So, yes, we were a very small grassroots org run out of my living room. And as I got to know Sam through this event, he said, you know what, I've got this cooking school attached to Buy Right, and I want to spin it off as a nonprofit. Would you want to take it over? And I thought, well, I just started a nonprofit. Why don't we merge them together? I knew absolutely nothing about mergers. I didn't know what that meant. Really didn't know that much about this cooking school they were running. I just knew that, I was running the small org and we were doing these free classes. We were funded by grants and donations. And it seemed like doing paid cooking classes in a teaching kitchen would be a good way to make money for the free programs I wanted to run. Social enterprise, it turns out, is not a great way to raise money. We do not make any money from our paid classes to support our free programs. It pretty much supports itself, but it does bring a lot of people through the door and connect people to the organization. And so today, it's been 12 years since we went through that merger in 2013. And we essentially are the same org today, offering free programming in the community and paid programming. We were very lucky to have a capacity building grant from one of our funders that helped us hire a consultant to take us through the merger process. I don't think you need to pay someone. I think you could do this yourself. But essentially, we walked through every element of staffing, board of directors, funding, communications plans, finance, all of those aspects in bringing the two orgs together. And the most important thing I think we learned is that you just have to have the right partners and both feel really confident in that you are both like two strong orgs coming together, or that there's a real benefit if there's a stronger org and a weaker org merging, that there's a real benefit to doing that and that you are going to come out and be successful in the end. So I cannot say enough good things about merging. I see a lot of nonprofits a lot of the time that are doing very similar work. And I know there are other considerations that some of our panelists are going to speak to in their own merger stories. So I'm now going to hand it off to Robin to share the story behind Streets for All SF.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Let's see. I think I had sent some slides. Perfect. Danielle's got it. Now that there's a ton here. But hi, everyone. I'm Robin. I run Streets for All San Francisco, which used to be Kids Safe SF up until about June of this year. So you can go to the next slide. Kids Safe SF, as Sarah said in her introduction, started in 2021. So we were a baby nonprofit in the very early stages of our journey. We started in 2021. We were an all-volunteer organization, and our mission was to make the city's pandemic-era street changes a permanent part of our urban landscape. So we were super focused on three major goals at our founding, which was protecting and making permanent JFK. We were an advocacy organization, so we did a bunch of lobbying at the Board of Supervisors, got that passed there, and then ran the ballot measure to further cement that victory. We worked on the city's slow streets, so making the slow streets program permanent. That was another campaign we ran in 2022 and have supported a lot of work to build up neighborhood groups to support the slow streets and engage neighbors around that program. And then the third thing we've done is worked on the Great Highway and Sunset Dunes. And there's a strong community nonprofit in the Sunset, and we've supported them more on the advocacy side. While they've really done a lot to engage the community and bring events and activation to the space. So we completed all those goals as of the end of 2024. And as we looked around and said, all right, what do we want to do next? Where are we going? We thought there were a few things that we started to consider. We thought that there was a lot of opportunity in our particular issue area of policy around safe streets, public transit, sustainable transportation in Sacramento at the state level, and working in passing better laws, building better capacity in the government and the DMV, the CPUC, all of the agencies that regulate, and Caltrans, all the agencies that regulate transportation. So we wanted to do more work in Sacramento. Um, and we wanted to do more in San Francisco with transformations like what you see here from Paris in 2016 to Paris today, where they've removed cars from this amazing part of the Seine. I don't know if anyone's been there, and now it's a beautiful park. So, Streets for All is an organization out of Los Angeles. We got to know them by knowledge sharing over the years and working on some particular pieces of legislation in Sacramento together over the years that we were running our main campaigns here in San Francisco. And we, as I thought about what do we want to do next, it became very clear that we, as an all volunteer organization, we were going to have to go through some kind of transition to bring on paid staff, start to evolve the organization, have a more formal board, and really grow up, take the next step in becoming a more mature nonprofit. And I I didn't want to do that alone as a co-founder of the organization and really the only person that was putting in um, a lot of hours and a lot of work. So I had similar to Sarah, found a partner that I really felt good about, someone who personally got along with well. And we had a number of conversations that eventually led to saying, how can we build something better together? Something that is more than the sum of our two parts. So Streets for All is out of Los Angeles. They had done similar work with ballot measures and advocacy on streets. They'd already been working in Sacramento. So we came together and became their San Francisco chapter earlier this year. And I can't remember exactly what I put on the next slides. This is just our work over the number of years. Streets for All they had started in 2019. So they were a little farther along than we were at KidSafe. They already had paid staff on board. I think they have the overall organization, I think now has 3 people, although we'll probably be back to 5 at the end of the year. So they had already gone through that transition of going from all volunteer to funded nonprofit with staff. They had run their own ballot measures similar to us. And we, I think the KidSafe SF brand, one thing that I think was a little interesting about this, Sarah mentioned, are you a smaller group joining with a bigger one and getting absorbed? Are you a merger of equals, creating a new brand? There's a lot of considerations here. For us, what happened is that we were a smaller, less mature organization getting absorbed into a larger one. So I would say, the hardest part of this whole process for me was that I had a lot of attachment to the brand that we had built and the work that we had done. As a parent who rides an e-bike, the work we had done around KidSafe SF had become very central to the identity of the organization. So making the decision to give that up and change our branding and become a new organization was, I would say, probably the most difficult thing that we had to do through this whole process. Not necessarily technically difficult, but emotionally difficult for the people who had been involved. Um, at the end of the day, we felt like that was the right decision for the work, for the organization. Streets for All had built an amazing brand in LA and Sacramento. And if we wanted to be something bigger and more inclusive and really build a movement around the work that we were doing, it made more sense to invest more in the brand that already had more of that equity more broadly. So let's see if we go to the next slide. Some of the other factors we thought about as we decided to merge were, we wanted the team that had worked on all of our campaigns in San Francisco, we wanted to work at a larger scale. We wanted access to Sacramento. We wanted to make an impact beyond just what we could do in the city. And we knew that in order to do the work we wanted to do in the city, we had to change laws at the state level and we had to build this movement more broadly than just San Francisco. I think a big part of any nonprofit's operating model is funding, obviously, and raising the money that you need to sustain the organization. For us, one of the drivers of merging was to be able to tell a bigger story to the funders and have a bigger impact that we could share beyond just San Francisco and be able to show that we were making progress and getting bigger and having a path to increasing our impact both locally and at the state level, and expanding the pool of people who would be interested in the work. So, you know, one of the benefits that we brought to the table as Kids Safe SF to Streets for All, which was based in LA, was access to a new pool of funders that they weren't able to access before. So suddenly, people who live in San Francisco and care about the issue that we work on, um, they had a reason to give both to San Francisco as well as to Streets for All state efforts as well. So that was something that we were able to bring to the table in the merger and value we're able to provide to the other organization. Um, the operational efficiencies, as I said, it can be lonely running a nonprofit and doing your own thing. And so being able to use the same accountant and the same software and the same backends, I think as we grow, we're hopeful that this will continue to increase in running a statewide organization with multiple chapters, that we will get increasing efficiencies of hiring, say, one communications director who can serve both of all of our chapters as well as the state level organization and help us to coordinate across different functions and have kind of the same back office operations. And then finally, just being part of a team, having people to work with, having people who care about the same thing and are working on similar challenges and issues, even if they're in another part of the state. But I think, especially in the era of remote work in the post-pandemic era, it's nice to have a team that you're a part of. And it's nice to have a bigger set of people to work with. I know for me personally, working remotely is not my favorite thing in the world. And being alone by myself all day is like not what I love and not why I come to work. So having people to work with, just, it makes it more fun and it makes it more sustainable over the long term. Um, what's on our next slide? I think it's almost done. Um, so how are we making it work? I think Sarah and Laura are both like much farther into the merger process than we are. We're still really new at this, so we're still figuring out what's going to make it work over the long term. But I think, the things that have worked well for us were finding the right partner, finding people who shared similar values, had a similar outlook on the world, a similar theory of change of how you get things done and what you want to achieve. Um, Finding ways to collaborate before merging, I think was really important for us. It allowed us to say, okay, I think this is a good thing, but let's test it out with a project. Let's like try to run a build together in Sacramento. Let's work together on something that lets us test out whether we think this is actually a good idea. And that was really helpful for us in leading up to the merger. I think knowing the strengths and weaknesses of what each party is bringing to the table. For us, that was, relationships with people in San Francisco who might be able to help the organization in new ways, whether that was through funding, through expertise, through connections that they had. And then Streets for All was bringing a really strong brand. They had much better developed backends than we did. And they have the established Sacramento reputation as well. And then just being low ego and having a collaborative mindset. I think that in a lot of, in my experience in advocacy nonprofits, a lot of people get into this because they want to promote themselves and they want their own, they're kind of they're in it for the cause, but they also can sometimes be in it for their own self-interest and wanting to, protect their own personal brand. And I think having being willing to say, all right, we love our brand, but we're going to have to drop it and try something else. because that's how we're actually going to get things done. I think when you can be focused on the outcomes and the change you're actually trying to drive and think about what's good for the organization, not just what's good for each founder or each executive director personally or each board member personally, that's where you can really find the good collaboration. So being able to put your own personal interests aside and actually say what's the best thing for the work we're trying to do and the outcomes we're trying to drive, that's when I think it works the best. Um, so I think that might be my last slide. I think we'll probably get into a lot more in Q&A and discussion, but yeah, excited to hear what everyone else has to say.
Thank you, Robin. So great overview. I'm going to turn it over to Laura to talk about Fresh Approach's story. Yes, thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Robin. I really feel like that close was so perfect. The finding that collaboration prior to a merger or establishing it, as you're investigating the merger can really help make things run a little bit more smoothly and really keeping the community in mind, the folks that, the programs are operating for, has been really crucial for us. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura deTar. I'm the Executive Director at Fresh Approach. In 2018, Fresh Approach completed a merger with a small organization called Collective Roots. Work on that merger began in 2017, but we did have a history of collaborating on projects since 2015. So we'd been knowing each other as organizations for a couple of years before we really stepped into this space. Collective Roots was an East Palo Alto-based nonprofit that had operated since 2000 and primarily installed school gardens throughout the city, cultivating them with students and teachers as part of science classrooms. The gardens and garden education were maintained by AmeriCorps, and Collective Roots had just a small handful of full-time staffers. Over the years of operation, they expanded from school gardens to also operating a community garden, and in 2008 opened the first farmers market in East Palo Alto at a time when the city of 30,000 people did not have one grocery store. In 2014, the organization Collective Roots went through some big funding changes and some staffing shifts, including the longtime executive director leaving the organization. And as the board reformed the organization in 2015, the core programs of the Collective Roots Community Garden and the East Palo Alto Community Farmers Market remained, but funding for school garden operations had really dwindled, and the AmeriCorps programs that supported school gardens had dwindled as well. So in 2016, the organization began working with the consultant again. Consultants are helpful on an organizational effectiveness project to really determine the size and sustainability of programs for the future. And the primary finding from that consultant was the administrative cost of the organization outsized the measure of the impact of their programs. And the consultant recommended that they start considering a merger or potentially becoming a fiscally sponsored project of another organization in order to be able to continue the work but reduce the administrative costs. The stars aligned a little bit in our merger. Shortly after Collective Roots got that recommendation, they also received a rejection from a county grant application that gave the reason their project was rejected was because it was too similar to one that Fresh Approach had proposed, and the county recommended that the two of us actually start to collaborate a little bit more. And this was a grant application where Collective Roots was, starting to do something new that Fresh Approach had been doing in East Palo Alto for a number of years. The quick alignment of consultant recommendation and funder recommendation pushed the Collective Roots staff to reach out to Fresh Approach about a merger. And, I was the program director at the time at Fresh Approach, and we had a really positive response to their request and developed a collaborative process that really just aimed to fold in Collective Roots programming into the administrative structure of Fresh Approach without changing the core purpose or operations of the community garden or the farmers market. In 2017, when the merger conversations began, Fresh Approach was operating food access programming in the form of mobile farmers markets in Contra Costa, Alameda, and Santa Clara counties, and offering nutrition education and cooking workshops in those counties, as well as San Mateo County. For Fresh Approach, the geography fit well, and it really gave us an opportunity to round out our programming that focused on improving food security, nutrition, and local food systems. The community garden gave Fresh Approach the opportunity to work with participants really through a full cycle of local food systems, encouraging folks to spend their fruit and vegetable budgets with local farmers, providing education and resources to improve people's health, and now providing a space where community members could increase their own food sovereignty by having land access and resources to grow their own food. So at the time of the merger, when our executive director approached me about the request, I didn't hesitate, primarily because I had known about Collective Roots for over a decade. I had volunteered with them and I knew the value of their programs in the community, and I didn't want those programs to go away. So we essentially adopted those programs into Fresh Approach's structure. We adopted the staff who were operating those programs so that we were able to continue the work and serve the community in the same way. As the merger progressed, both of us worked with that original consultant that Collective Roots had engaged with to go through a due diligence process, examining our financials, leading conversations across our boards, and echo what others have said, that this was the consultant was definitely a key to a really smooth process for us. Once the paperwork was complete, we hosted a community event. Collective Roots was a really well-known East Palo Alto nonprofit. And so we wanted to host an event to, let all the stakeholders know what was happening and demystify the process for folks. As a part of preparing for that event, we had Collective Roots staff personally called and invited all of the stakeholders. So all of the gardeners, farmers market shoppers, local city council folks, other local nonprofits, and Collective Roots funders. That event had staff from both of our organizations share their goals with the merger and really help folks understand that our organizations were mission aligned, but we were also culture aligned. So we had this deep care that we were going to bring into this merger and into operating programs in East Palo Alto. That warm handoff of community, of staff, of funders, again, made for a really smooth transition. And Fresh Approach has been able to actually maintain all of the funding relationships that Collective Roots held at the time, and actually been able to see those relationships grow and the grants that those funders provide increase over the years as we've been able to document more and more impact. As we integrated Collective Roots programs into Fresh Approach's structure, one of the things that we made sure to keep was the branding, actually, of the community garden, especially by integrating the Collective Roots name into how we talked about that program at Fresh Approach. So it was always the Collective Roots Community Garden. And we maintained that branding until just this year when we actually had to move the garden to a new location. So we took that opportunity to rebrand the garden after those years of building trust with the community, to rebrand the garden to just simply be the East Palo Alto Community Garden. In that kind of those early months of the merger, we also took the opportunity for our newly formed and larger Fresh Approach staff to collaboratively define and set core values for our organization, so that we could make sure that the values that Fresh Approach did not have defined core values before. So and neither did Collective Roots in such a formal way. But we took this opportunity to really make sure we were integrating our organizations, both in the programs and the operations of it all, but also in our culture, and the way that we approach community and the way that we also approach each other internally. And those core values, we continue to uphold them today. Just a little bit of rewording, but they continue to be, a really strong guide for our programs and our organizational culture over the past many years. Um, since the merger, so seven years down the road, we've been able to expand the team that operates the programs that were once Collective Roots. From, when we merged, they had two part-time staff positions that we brought both of those folks on to the Fresh Approach team. And now we have three full-time staff positions and three part-time roles that are supporting the programming in that community specifically. We've expanded the measured impact of those programs and the reputation of the farmers market and the community garden throughout East Palo Alto. One of the two Collective Roots staff who joined Fresh Approach in the merger is still with us today as our development director. And all told, feel like things have gone really successfully. It did take time for the East Palo Alto community to trust Fresh Approach. But as programs continued without any major changes over the years after the merger, we've gained a really deep collaboration with the East Palo Alto community and continue to prioritize work in that community. Several of the folks that were longtime community gardeners and farmers market shoppers in East Palo Alto are now some of the leaders of our community advisory board. So those folks have, not only grown to trust Fresh Approach and that we'll be offering those programs, but they're also investing their own time in supporting the program operations and guiding the vision of the organization. So no PowerPoint from me, but I think that's about the story that I have. Happy to answer any questions as we go.
Thank you, Laura. Sometimes it's just okay to listen. We don't have to look at things. Thank you for sharing all those details about kind of the impact on community. I think that is something that, when we're thinking about mergers and the logistics of mergers, like how to be thoughtful about, communicating it in the community that you're working in. I'm curious to know if there were any concerns from stakeholders through this process. Like, were there any naysayers that you had to work with, and how did you address any of those challenges?
No, I wouldn't say there was any outright naysayers, but a couple of the folks that are on our community advisory board now, and one of them is also on our board of directors, has told me personally many times that she was very skeptical. She did not know who Fresh Approach was, what this was going to look like, and just felt like, oh no, what's going to happen to my community garden? And as over the first even 6 months, year that we were there and operating, as nothing changed for community, and really as what wound up happening was that we were able to offer more workshops. We were able to offer, a wider variety of things because now we had, similar to what Robin said, once you go from having just two part-time folks to actually having a team of people that are talking and thinking about things with you, you get new ideas and, new collaborations come forward. And so I think the community started to see that both nothing was changing and also that the changes that were happening were just actually increasing the impact of the program for them as well. So nobody told me outright at the time, but in the years since, as we've continued to develop that trust and those relationships, we have heard people say they didn't know about us at first, but they're feeling good now.
Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot of effort into reassuring folks and being respectful of different communities that you were entering into. Robin, I'm curious for your team. I know since there's political and advocacy issues involved in your orgs, if there were any conflicts or concerns during your merger about how your organizations would fit in and what your priorities were.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the more political advocacy nature of our work, a big part of what we kind of evaluated during the merger process was are we aligned on our values? And are we aligned on the philosophy we might take if we are going to endorse candidates and if we are going to, move forward in advocating for specific priorities? So that was a big part of testing the waters and working things out was what do we think? What if we do have disagreements and what will we do if that happens? And, we actually are encountering a situation right now where we have a San Francisco person who is interested in funding the organization, but has, a difference of opinion on a race in Southern California that the LA folks are planning to endorse in. And so we're kind of navigating that and thinking like, all right, well, we might not, maybe that funding is going to be less than it might have been because of how this is working out. But I think it's just something that uh, you kind of evaluate it as every situation comes up, and there might be some trade-offs with that. But at the end of the day, I think prioritizing the policies and the outcomes that we're trying to fight for is helping to clarify, yeah, even if we do lose out on some funding, it is important to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the organization and the organization's priorities. So, it's not easy, but it's clarifying.
Yes, thank you. I'm curious to hear more about your boards. So we all know boards of directors are their own beasts, and curious to know what role your boards played and how your boards evolved during the merger process.
I can go first. I think ours is probably a simpler story. KidSafe was a 501(c)(4), so we are an advocacy organization, and um, we had a kind of a shell of an organization and a board, so we weren't even super developed. We actually had more of a like volunteer leadership team they weren't officially a board, but they were basically doing the work to run the organization. So we had two people who had helped co-found the organization on our board, and they didn't necessarily want to be beyond our founding three goals. They weren't they wanted to make sure that we found the right home for the work going forward. And I think one of them especially was interested in not having any financial obligations to the organization or legal obligations to the organization going forward. He actually wanted to get off the board. So that made selling the merger very easy for him because he got to say, great, like we did our thing, put it to bed, and I'm out. Um, and the other one was actually okay with just stepping back as well. So, um, what ended up happening in the merger is that I joined the board of the other organization's C4. So they had a small board, I think 5 people who were mostly a couple of funders of theirs and a couple of their like community leaders in Los Angeles. So I've joined their board, and now we're working on getting 1 or 2 San Francisco funders to also join the board. But I think our shared philosophy on boards is to keep them pretty small, and, involve people who are passionate about the cause and want to help in other ways. Like we have a steering committee in San Francisco and a steering committee in Los Angeles that make more of the operational decisions about which policy areas the organization is going to prioritize, where we're going to actually run campaigns, and if we are going to make endorsements, who we're going to endorse. And that's all run through those steering committees, which are not official board positions. And then the board just kind of signs off at the end of the day. So the board is really more of a like advisory, kind of legal, financial body than it is a like policy making body for the organization. So TBD, we're still working on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, being a C4 is yeah, you got a whole nother twist to
yes, exactly.
your story overall.
Yeah.
Laura, what about your board?
Yeah, so we were both C3 organizations, so good to have a contrast. And the Collective Roots Board was really kind of driving the merger request and the work with the consultant that they had been with. And a lot of board members, and the consultant recommended that they look for a merger or to become a fiscally sponsored project. A lot of board members had thought, let's just wind down this organization. Let's just, let's end. We've got a few grants that are going now, but let's see them through the end, and then, we'll be done. But the staff at the organization were like, no, we can find another option. So they found Fresh Approach. So the board of Collective Roots, because so many were of the mentality, let's shut this down. We invited them to join our board, but no one took us up on the opportunity. And we so but their board did, we all went through the due diligence process together, and they essentially felt like the organization that Collective Roots was stepping into a good home and had good stewards, and so the board felt comfortable essentially letting it go. um, but I think, with the staffing shakeup that happened with Collective Roots in 2014, just a couple of years before this merger, I think that shakeup, and then the way that the finances were looking for the organization was sort of what was leading the board to think, oh, maybe this isn't, something that's viable to continue. Um, so we didn't have any board transfer, which I would have liked a new board member. Because they always, they come and go for Fresh Approach. We keep around 6, but I'm always trying to get up towards 8 or 10, just so I can get more folks supporting the organization. And yeah, so it wasn't too challenging, I think, because the Collective Roots board was really looking for this answer.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you feel like they were kind of hanging on as board members to just
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah, it
finish.
was a small,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a small board at that point. I think it was only 4 board members. So they had, maybe it was actually 3. I think they just had one in kind of each officer position that was required. And they met twice a year. So it was really not an active board in any way. Um, so
Well, this is a whole other discussion here, Marianne, about boards. Such an interesting topic. Like for a small organization to have 3 unengaged board members, it's like such a big red flag for that org. I mean, clearly they all felt like we're going down with the ship. And it's amazing that you were able to come along and salvage this org that had been around for a long time, providing just amazing services in that community, and would be like a shame if it disappeared. Have you recruited new board members in East Palo Alto since all those folks left?
um, we have we have so our as I mentioned, kind of one of our naysayers, or the one who's been, open with me about it, is a East Palo Alto resident, and she's a member of our board of directors now. So she's our community participant, from the garden, and some of our other workshops, that has joined our board of directors now. She joined our community advisory board first. Our community advisory board is made up of about 15 folks that are either program participants that, is for how they first learned about Fresh Approach, was through one of our programs, or they're some of our community partners, so some of the organizations that we collaborate with throughout the Bay. And those folks, we provide them with a lot of the goal of the community advisory board is we're still developing it. We really just launched it in 2021. But we are, the goal of it is to provide opportunities for board leadership for folks that, are, often not thought of as board members. And to really engage community voice in our board leadership. So we're working on still formalizing the community advisory board as a formal subcommittee of our board of directors. But having Jeannie on our board at this point in time is kind of starting to make that connection for us. So we're really bringing those 2 bodies together as, an advisory board, and then the board with the fiduciary responsibility for the organization.
Thank you. All right, I'll save further board questions for our juicy board of directors session, which will not be recorded. You mentioned that there was a consultant working with Collective Roots that kind of helped with the merger. I'm curious if there were other tools, frameworks, resources, assistants, consultants, God forbid, attorneys who helped out with that process. And like, what did you find very helpful? What would you recommend? And how did you pay for any of that support if you had it?
Yeah. Um, Collective Roots had a connection with pro bono lawyers. And so those lawyers supported the merger process with all of the legal paperwork. And they are now our pro bono lawyers. Um, the consultant work was a part of a grant that Collective Roots had received. And so they were able to, afford the costs of that consultant and the merger work through that grant opportunity. Um, did I catch all your questions? I think I did.
Yeah, Robin, I'm curious, the same question for you. Like what resources did you need to make it happen and how did you get them?
Yeah, we had gotten a little bit of funding at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, that we had stretched a long way. But the resources we needed were basically lawyers. We need the lawyers to come up with this, we got advice from Streets for All's existing lawyer who had done a lot of work has advised a lot of political advocacy organizations, does a lot of C3, C4 work. And she basically gave us we had a conversation with her. She gave us a couple of models, like you could do it this way, or you could do it this way. You could keep your own C4s or you could merge them. And basically what we ended up doing was creating a charter for a San Francisco chapter under Streets for All's existing entity. And then I worked with the lawyer we had used to set up KidSafe several years ago and who had been our corporate lawyer for the organization for the past few years to do a wind down process on KidSafe's existing C4. So essentially we just had to transfer our bank account over and do some legal work to wind down the organization. It wasn't terribly expensive, honestly. We did not use consultants. We did it more DIY, but the lawyers really are important to getting it right and doing it the right way. But it was not terribly expensive. If we had been a C3, we probably could have used a pro bono lawyer, but because we're not, that's harder. And so we just had some existing funds that we used to cover that cost.
Mm-hmm. Any other resources that you needed, like outside resources that you needed to bring
I'm trying to think. The lawyers were the main ones. What's that?
They always are.
Yeah, I think the lawyers were the main ones. I think as we're now we're looking at a few projects that, for example, we have to merge our email lists. We have two different email lists, and we now have people who are signing up for one of the benefits of merging is that Streets for All had already set up a membership program. And we were able to just start promoting that to our San Francisco audience and say, sign up to become a member, become a recurring donor through the infrastructure they already had. But now we have people signing up to become members and recurring donors, and they're getting a lot of LA specific content. And we haven't merged our email list yet into one provider. So we don't have a way for somebody to go in and say, hey, I'm in San Francisco, stop sending me the LA stuff, send me the San Francisco stuff instead. So that's something where fortunately, we have friends who know how email systems work. So we're probably going to end up getting a little bit I've already gotten some advice on how to make it happen and how to bring them together. But I think that is, we're fortunate that Streets for All has a web developer on staff who can do website work and marketing and branding. So he was really helpful as we brought the brands together to work on the launch and get some new merchandise out. I think we relied a lot on the staffing that Streets for All already had. And then as we're going forward through some of these next projects, honestly, we have a fair number of pretty highly skilled volunteers. Some of them might end up helping us with these projects. We'll see.
Yeah, having friends who know how to do things is one of the most nonprofit answers ever. So classic. Just so much DIY.
Yes.
We have a question from the chat, which is more input on how to navigate the conversation about brand attachment and thinking about branding, names, obviously merch. Thank you for bringing that up, Robin. Very important. How to navigate those conversations around rebranding or renaming with community members and stakeholders.
I mean, I guess I can start. I think that when you work at a nonprofit, at least for me personally, like working in like doing this work and like being living and breathing it all day long, I think I was probably the person who had the most attachment to the brand. I think I always try to remember that like people outside of my worldview, like they're not thinking about me on a daily basis. They're not thinking about our brand on a daily basis. And so for them, it's really a matter of bringing them along and explaining pretty clearly, like, this is the value that it's going to bring. Like, we're doing this because it's going to let us tell that bigger story, access more impact, increase our ability to do more good work. And I think approaching it from that perspective and from that perspective of shared values, people get it, they understand. We're 4 or 5 months into this. Like every email we send out still says like Kid Safe SF is now Streets for All San Francisco. And like all of our social handles still say that. And my email signature says that. And like people don't pay attention to things very much. So they're probably not going to read your announcement email. They're probably going to interact with this rebranding somewhere else. So just paying attention to like all of the channels and all of the places where people are interacting and continuing to like we do less kind of direct community work. So I think I'll let Laura speak to that a little more. But I think with the rebranding process, it was really about thinking through every single touch point in every single place and making sure that we're showing up consistently and telling the story over and over and over again, even if it feels like we've already told it a million times. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Such a good reminder, like just keep telling the same story. Laura, for you, curious to just go deeper into like how that conversation around branding and brand attachment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was kind of similarly, at least with our kind of like outward communications, definitely a repeat for a number of months, especially for, our East Palo Alto farmers market customers that were now receiving communications from Fresh Approach and getting them to sign up for things all over again in a different way. And letting them know that it was just the same thing, but a different name. So there was that piece, but for us with the community members, it was really like the event that we hosted was really well received. Folks really appreciated just like the open and honest communication that happened there, the talking from that they, the words that they heard from folks that they had known from Collective Roots for years. And, those folks being like, this is going to be great. We're excited about this. It's going to be good for everything you've been engaging with. And then Fresh Approach staff, sharing a similar enthusiasm and a similar just desire to be able to keep things going in the community. So I think that event really set us off on a strong foot. But then, like I said, there were still people who were skeptical, as they should be. And so it's just that ongoing presence, for us that and getting to see those people regularly and getting to continue to maintain and build that trust was huge. And because Collective Roots was such an established nonprofit in East Palo Alto, we really felt that maintaining the name of the community garden as the Collective Roots Community Garden, we kept the logo. So all of our, materials that went out were into the community, all the flyers and things we put out still had that same logo. So people still recognized it. They still saw that same name. And keeping that, the same, I think for folks really help them understand that, things are not different. And it also helped them know that, hey, this isn't a new community garden. This is just the same one that's been there forever. And let's keep going. Those workshops are still happening. Let's keep going. So I think that helped a lot. And it helped the staff too, similar to what Robin said, especially the community garden manager was attached to that logo. She was attached to that name. She had been there for a number of years and had been cultivating that space. And so, being able to bring that over, I think helped her feel at home as well.
I like that idea of having, thanks, Laura, of keeping the name as almost like Collective Roots is now a program of Fresh Approach as kind of a soft landing into the merger. We're kind of slowly changing it. Robin, what happened at your launch
Um, yeah, we hosted a launch event too. I think Laura had mentioned that. I think events are really important as a way to bring people together, especially in this like post-pandemic era. So we had a big launch party for the new brand where we launched our new merch and we told our story and we brought a couple of folks from the LA team actually came to San Francisco for the event, so they got to meet people. And it was just a really nice way to acknowledge the contributions of so many volunteers who had helped on our campaigns and, put a capstone on like, we did this great work and now this is the next chapter. And I think having an event, I would say, gives you like an external deadline and a big forcing function to like get a bunch of things ready to go and launch them all at the same time. I'm a former marketer, so like this is it's kind of what I did in a past life. But yeah, I'm a big believer in events as a way to like mark the transition and mark a big milestone like that, and help people really internalize that like this is a big deal. We had some politicians come to speak to talk about how much they appreciated our work. And yeah, it was just a good moment of community acknowledgement, and send off into the next chapter.
I know that it sounds like your mergers have gone very swimmingly, but I'm curious to know if there's anything that you would have done differently now that you're on the other side.
I can jump in. I probably would have done it faster. I think like it all worked out in the right way in the end, but we actually started talking about doing this almost 2 years before it happened. So we had met the Streets for All team. When I first had the idea, it was early 2023. I was very pregnant. I had a kid in April of 2023. So it was like January. And I called up the CEO of the other organization and said, how about I just like fly to LA for the day? And we'll like talk about that. We'll like meet in person. We'd never met in person at that point. We had only had phone calls. But like, how about we just like talk about it? I'll come to LA. We'll like meet each other. So I flew to LA. I went to his house. We like had a whole, 4 hours of like, all right, let's like put it on a whiteboard. What would this look like? What would the branding be? What would we do? Like, how would we like, are we going to be okay working together? Are we going to get along? Like, what is this personal relationship going to be like? And that was early 2023. And it took us over 2 years after that to actually finalize the merger. And I think a lot of it was like a lot of that was my emotional hesitation to give up the brand. A lot of that was the timing of like having a baby and then having a ballot measure campaign that we worked on in 2024 and kind of getting distracted by the other things going on. But I think I like my personal reflection is I would have moved faster. I would have done it sooner. And I think once you make a decision like that, doing it faster is usually a good thing to do.
Don't drag it on for 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Maybe don't have a baby in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Or
It does slow things down a little.
slow things down.
Yeah.
Laura, what about for you? Is there anything that you would have done differently?
I would probably say have one or two more community events in the course of that kind of first year, especially because it was such a, city specific organization, Collective Roots, that really, not everybody's going to be able to make one event. But I think it would have been nice if we had hosted more events, maybe not at the same scale, but, more listening sessions, kind of more feedback spaces with community members. So the folks that were feeling a little hesitant and tentative, maybe could have spoken up, or at least had a space to be able to do so, in that first year. so that we could, continue to reassure them that, things are gonna, only change in a good way. Um, but for our process was pretty quick from the time that we, really got on board and started moving. It was within 6 months that the paperwork was complete for us. So it can take 2 years, but it can also take 6 months or less. I'm not sure how Sarah, how long your process took.
I think it was about 6 months. We had 6 board meetings. We used to meet every month at this time. We had 6 board meetings and we kind of assigned a topic to each one and we discussed like staffing, communications, finance, fundraising, et cetera, and like did the legal stuff throughout that time. Legally, what we did is Three Squares absorbed this nebulous project into itself and then changed our name to 18 Reasons. So my 501c3 letter actually says Three Squares. So Robin, I feel you on being attached to the original branding. I still own threesquares.org just in case. I don't know. But it took us about 6 months as well to kind of get through all of that. But we also were merging boards. We had 5 and 5 and we became 10. And so there was a lot of energy from both boards on like, is this the right decision? Are we doing the right thing? Like, what do we need to think about? Everyone was very, very engaged, even though technically the 18 Reasons Board was not a legal board because it was basically a fiscally sponsored project. But they had a very engaged advisory board. So, when boards are involved, things always take a little longer, but you get a lot of great input from board members as well. All right. I have 2 more questions for you. First, what advice would you give to other nonprofit leaders considering a merger, Laura?
Um, I appreciated the consultant. I know Robin didn't work with one, but having that consultant who had experience with nonprofit mergers and, could really walk both of our boards through that due diligence process and sort of talk through all the bits and pieces and know what the future outcome was going to be and then engage those lawyers at the right point in time, was so valuable for us. I feel like that was really a key piece. Um, and then just that outward communication, I think with the community that's, takes a year and 2 years to really get through it all. And for people to understand, who the new organization is. Um, yeah, I would say that was really key for us.
Right for you, Robin.
Um, I think my main piece of advice would be like do it. I think
That's
like
my advice too.
yeah.
That's why we're here. Like, do it. It's good.
Yeah, it's good. I think like we live in a world where the funding landscape is hard right now and there's a lot of uncertainty in the world and I think larger organizations with more board power, more fundraising power, more community capacity are just going to be more resilient going forward and more able to deliver on their mission and goals. And so I think like if the opportunity is there, I would say like or go create the opportunity. I think it's just a really valuable thing to do. And in the space that I operate in, there's a lot of like 1 to 4 person nonprofits out there doing somewhat similar things. And I'm kind of just like, why can't everybody just like come together and be like a, 20 person group that can get a lot more done?
Yeah, I mean that's my last question is are you seeing other mergers happening? Are you seeing other folks having those conversations? So like have you heard about people in the space that you're in considering or going through with mergers?
I mean, I haven't heard of that many, but I was at a meeting earlier this week with other transportation leaders from across California, and somebody came up to me at that meeting and was like, "Hey, like, I want to ask you about this. Like, I'm really interested in learning more, and like, maybe you could absorb my organization too." And I think people are like, to the point of the collective roots board that was like looking for an out. Like, I do think there's a lot of people who are thinking about like, what is the future? Like, how do I make this sustainable? And so I think it is on people's minds for sure.
What for you?
Yeah, I haven't heard of too many more, but Yeah, I kind of do the same thing as I push it. It's like if you, if there's an opportunity for you to bring together and reduce the admin costs, of your organization. And also, the outcome that we saw was really, oh, we're able to actually enhance these programs and increase the impact for the community because now we have a team of folks that are working on both of those things. And so it can really it can uplift, your organization that might be struggling in some ways just by and sort of then it starts to ingrain this level of collaboration into your work that, as nonprofits, right, there's just often this competition amongst us that has never felt right to me. It's like, no, the more that we can collaborate or, at least know what each other are doing and, make sure we're not duplicating all of our efforts in the same community, then, the greater those outcomes are going to be for the whole. And so bringing those groups together, I think you can just you can have a lot more creativity in the way that you approach projects.
Thank you. It sounds like Amy in the chat is looking for a merger partner. Maybe we have like a little speed dating nonprofit merger. Maybe that's our next panel. All right, those are all my questions. I'm going to open it up to other folks in the room. And I see our first question here from Erin about staffing. So sounds like staffing kind of worked out naturally for both of you in your mergers. That was true for myself as well. I did not have the dicey situation of two EDs trying to figure out who was going to be the ED, which I think is very common in mergers. I'm curious how you have navigated thinking about staffing, if you are going to have overlap or if there was any reduction in staffing as you merged.
I can start. We did have two EDs, but the ED at Collective Roots was the wife of one of the board members. And she was placed into the ED role after the 2014 shakeup because she had a accounting and finance background. And they were like, we know that you'll be able to handle that piece of the organization. So could you just, and she was a part-time ED. So everyone at Collective Roots was part-time. And so when they were looking for a merger partner, they were also looking for someone that would be the executive director. So they weren't bringing that level of competition, I think, into the conversation. And then the other staff, we were able to, we needed them because they were operating the programs that we were adopting. And they knew what to do and how to keep things going. So we kept those folks on board and then were able to turn them into full-time roles.
Robin, it sounds like staffing is pretty minimal consideration.
Yeah, we didn't have paid staff before this. Part of our goal in doing the merger was to be able to go raise money to hire staff. So that's what we're working on right now. In terms of the co-EDs or, how do you handle that? I think, the CEO of Streets for All was already the CEO. And because we were merging into their organization, it was pretty natural for me to say, like, I'm going to be the San Francisco director. And in that role, I'm going to continue to run the San Francisco work and I'm going to support the state work. But that's, and I think over time that could evolve. But, I wasn't personally looking to like take over someone else's nonprofit that they had started. I was really more looking for a home with more stability and more of a long-term future for the work we had already been doing. And my heart personally is really in it's in doing the advocacy work and showing up. And I love like running campaigns and working on the day-to-day policy and advocacy side of things. And I was not personally looking to be have the responsibility of running the entire organization. So for me, it was also like a nice way to be like, great, I'm gonna like someone else is gonna take on more of that administrative responsibility and I'll help and there's things I'll still have to do, but like I'm not gonna have to do all of it myself.
Wow,
and I'm okay with that.
Making me rethink my whole life here, Robin. Erin, Erin, do you have other questions about staffing that you want to bring up?
No, I think that was helpful. I mean, it sounds like in all these instances there were also these like discrete sort of like projects or programs that so then it almost is easier to be like, okay, this group of people continues to do this thing versus a situation where it's like actually our work is so similar that it's like how would it look to kind of come together and actually do we need this many people doing a sort of similar thing, and like those kinds of conversations. I think that's what I was curious about.
I can share a little bit towards that, Erin. When we brought on the two staff folks from Collective Roots. One was kind of operating the farmers market, but was also doing development work for the organization, kind of like overseeing programs generally. So sitting in what would have been maybe a program director role if that organization had it. And the other was just operating the community garden. When we the staff person who was doing more development work and program level work or program director level work, when they came on to Fresh Approach, they actually stopped managing the East Palo Alto Farmers Market. So we wound up hiring another person to operate that market. And Rafaela started, she and I worked really closely together, for the first year on integrating our programs and, putting out that message to the community and, making sure that things remained the same, but also starting to look at, okay, how can we, some of the things that the consultant had brought up with Collective Roots was that they just weren't measuring the impact of their programs in a way that really could show a return on the investment for funders, right? And so grant funds had been dwindling in different spaces. And so we started developing new, metrics and ways that we could really measure the impact of those programs. And as Rafaela continued to stay with our organization, in that role, then she actually stepped into a development role. And so we kind of integrated our programs, and then she started supporting a lot of the fundraising efforts of the organization, and then has now stepped into the development director role at our organization. She's been in that space for the last 5 years.
Okay,
So it
I
was
realized
she
actually,
shifted
yeah.
in what she did for the org,
Mhm.
based on the talents that she brought to Fresh Approach, really.
Yeah. And maybe as a follow-up, the other thing I was thinking about just very practically is like if people who have similar positions make different salaries, um, and then like how does that work or like yeah, how did you all navigate that?
We just used the salary structure that Fresh Approach had. So for folks that in our instance, folks that were working at Collective Roots were not, they were making less than what they would make as a Fresh Approach employee. And so they received, a little raise as a part of the merger, so that their positions would be kind of, equitable across the other, management positions at our organization.
I'll get back to you on that question in a few months as we have staff.
Yeah, we didn't have any similar positions. We kind of created some from scratch and then did not level set for a long time across like different departments. And it took us a long time to actually realize, oh, if people have a similar title, but they work in a very different department, they should probably have something like the same salary. And that took a long time to figure out. Laura V.
Yes, I have a question. So I'm curious about sort of if an organization was considering doing this, how might they go about finding partners to do this with? I mean, it sounds like Robin, someone just like grabbed you in the hall and was like, take me. But
No,
do
it
you
was
have
the other way
other
around.
thoughts?
It was the other way around. I reached out to them. And
Right,
felt
right. But I mean, but then someone else at a meeting
oh yeah,
was like,
yes,
yeah,
that's true.
right.
That's true. Yeah.
So yeah, thoughts on how you might find sort of potential merger partners, um, or partners, I guess. It sounds like another way that this often happens is sort of backing into it by starting with project-based work. So just curious about thoughts on how you find sort of those collaborations or guidance you might give to small nonprofits who are looking for those collaborations.
I feel like it's going to be different depending on the sector and the type of work that you're doing. I think in my space in advocacy, like it's not a huge field of players that are out there. Like we kind of know, like at least in the Bay Area, like I kind of know all the people who are involved. Um, and then you look kind of statewide, I feel like there's just like networks of people in my space that just like aren't that big. And I've worked with many of them over the past 4 years on various campaigns or projects or initiatives that we've done. So through that, I've kind of gotten a sense of, at least in the Bay Area, people like, who do I like to work with? Who's more difficult? Like, where is the history? Like, where might an organization be like too complex that you wouldn't even want to begin to take that on? Um, and so I think there's, a lot of it is just going to be like getting out there and knowing the other, like being well networked in the space that you're in, knowing the other EDs, knowing people who are on the boards of those organizations. And, it sounds like, Laura's came through a board member, like the board of the other organization. And I think funders are another place to really find this. We haven't really talked that much about that, but I think that like I look, if I were somebody who was funding a lot of nonprofits right now, I would be talking to every one of the people that I fund and saying like, is this something you might want to consider? Like, are there people out there that we can start to talk to and work with? And maybe here's two similar people in my portfolio. And I think I wish that more people who funded nonprofits and more philanthropists were thinking about this as an opportunity area for their portfolios.
100%. I mean, Laura said that's what happened to her. Like a funder was like,
Mhm.
through the same proposal, but I'm sure they see that all the time and they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they fund the similar proposals, depending, and they're like, oh, it's just slightly different neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
and so, we see the impact and the importance of that work. So it is, I appreciate that, Robin. I think that it would be, because funders really kind of see that full landscape of what they're funding in a community. They have priorities that are set that, line up all these different nonprofits into their priority categories. Every foundation that funds us and other organizations, I'm always like, can we get a little grantee collaborative going on? Can we like know what we're all doing so that we can have the most impact across the entire community that you're trying to serve? Can we? Some funders are like, yeah, let's do it, and it fizzles. Other funders are like, oh, we can't share your contact information. Like, you don't have. You can just bring us together. We'll share our own information, but
We'll
it's
all appear
it's
anonymously. It's okay.
right. But yeah, I would say similar, Robin, like that it was a funding proposal that kind of gave Collective Roots the idea. But I think in any little like ecosystem of nonprofits, whether we're C3s or C4s, you kind of you've heard about some other folks that do similar work to what you're doing. And, if you're feeling like the sustainability of your org is not, really viable, or that it's just really difficult, and you're starting to think about a merger, then go check out those other orgs, get to know them a little bit more. Learn everything you can from their websites, and maybe like go to a volunteer day or two, so that you can have that opportunity. I knew Collective Roots so well because I'd had AmeriCorps experiences where we volunteered with Collective Roots. I'd volunteered with Collective Roots independently. We had collaborated as organizations once I started working at Fresh Approach. So it was, we knew each other, and saw this similarity in a way that we could come together to, create a stronger impact for the community. And that just seemed like the ultimate purpose of us as nonprofits, is like, hey, how can we really uplift the community together? And instead of, competing against each other to do the same thing. So I think, find folks that or if you don't know folks, get out there and try to, so that you can and get to know them a little bit too. Because I think that as we came into the conversations about our merger, we already knew a little bit that our culture was the same and that our values were the same, even though we didn't have defined values, but just the way we showed up in community was the same. And so we knew, okay, this feels like it might be a good thing. This is a good collaborator of ours. And so how can we, step that relationship a little bit deeper?
Thanks, Laura. You know what? It's just like dating. You got to put yourself out there, right? Just like you see someone, they look kind of nice, like go talk to them. You never know what's going to happen. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. Big thank you to Laura and Pam for being here. So insightful, like such a great conversation. Talking not only about mergers, but I think some of the bigger issues in nonprofits about like how can we really make a difference and work together on that bigger level. So yes, thank you everyone for your virtual applause. And before we end, we just have a couple announcements from Shape Up. We of course have an evaluation because, as Laura said, it is so important to evaluate your impact. So I know you're all going to fill out our evaluation that I think someone's going to drop in the chat. And then I wanted to just drop in also that there is a workshop, another workshop about mergers coming up that Catch a Fire and Candid are doing. I'll drop it in the chat. Candid and GuideStar went through a merger. I don't know what Candid was, honestly, but now it's called Candid, and it's Candid, and I guess it's the Foundation Center, and GuideStar became one thing. And so they're doing another workshop about mergers if you want to get some other perspectives. And then finally, please join us at our meeting on November 20th at the Ferry Building with lunch from Beanies. Yes, I will find the email. Sorry about that. Please register for the coalition so we know how much beanies to order. And at that session, we're going to have 3 of Shape Up's capacity building grantees come and talk about their experience getting a capacity building grant. I think, you know, today's conversation is all like this behind the scenes stuff, and capacity building is another great behind the scenes topic. So I'm really excited to hear from some of our grantees. If anyone has any announcements, events, hiring, etc., please drop it in the chat. And Danielle will also drop the link to sign up for our newsletter. Is there anything else I missed, Marianne or Danielle, from all of our announcements?
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to note the survey is going to pop up when you sign off of the Zoom. So it'll just be on your screen. And we do appreciate your feedback.
Thank you all so much. I will see if I can find this Catch a Fire thing. Sorry, it's some like weird email link, but I'll forward it to you all. And thank you so much for joining, everybody, and have a great day.